This is going to come to you in two parts. Part one, I'm just going to talk about the basic math concepts behind what you're going to do specifically for what you sent for me. And I know you can do this. I'm going to start with a couple kitchen examples and then do one simple example from a pharmacy. And then part two will be specifically the examples you sent for me. I know you can do this. Absolutely. Okay, example one. Imagine you have a rice cooker in your house. Not that you would ever have one, but let's pretend you did. And a rice cooker gives you a basic recipe, which calls for 1 cup of rice for every 1.5 cups of water, and that's going to serve 4 people. You have 12 people coming for dinner. How much rice and water do you need in the cooker? Now, you could actually do this in your head, but I'm going to take what you would normally do in your head and make it more like a math problem so that you can see how what you normally already do in your head, you're completely competent of doing this in your head, that you're going to be able to carry it over to the pharmacy because it's all the same thing. So I'm taking a skill that you normally use and we're just going to slowly transfer it to more complex pharmacy stuff. Okay, so the first thing is you just want to identify the pieces of the puzzle. Here's your basic recipe. We have 12 people coming for dinner. How much rice and water? First off, here's a fancy word for something you already know. A concentration is the amount of stuff per an amount of usually a liquid. So the concentration here of rice to water, it's literally a concentration, is 1 cup rice for every 1.5 cups water. That's a concentration. Now, I want to make it for 4 people. So first off, I know I take my 12 people and my original recipe serves 4 people. So I see that I need to triple the recipe. So now I'm going to figure out, I already know if I'm going to triple the recipe, that means I use this proportion, 1 cup rice to 1.5 cups water. And now I'm going to triple the recipe, so I'm going to have 3 cups rice to an unknown amount of water, because that's what I want to calculate. This is called a proportion. Okay, just some vocabulary here. When we do something over something, that's called a ratio. So all fractions are ratios. 3/4 is a ratio. 1/2 is a ratio. Any fraction is a ratio. When we have an equation of ratios, equation means an equal sign. An equation of a ratio, this is called a proportion. So a ratio is when you have something over something. A proportion is where you have 2 ratios which are equal to each other. It's an equation of ratios. A proportion is an equation of ratios. To solve mathematically, we do something called cross multiplication. So I always actually draw the arrows. So I'm going to go here. I'm just going to stay with my numbers. I'm only looking at my numbers. And my proportions, all of it's in cups. So it's 1 times an unknown equals 1.5 times 3. If we were in algebra class, we would simply take that unknown and we'd make it that infamous x. So we simply do 1.5 times 3. So $1.50 times 3, that's $3 plus 3.50 cents, that's $4.50. So 1x equals $4.50. Technically here we divide by 1, so we get x by itself. So the amount of water we need is going to be, in this case, 4.5 cups of water. So if I want 3 cups of rice, I'm going to use 4.5 cups of water. So vocabulary, when you have the amount of stuff inside a liquid, that's called a concentration. Something over something, in other words, a fraction, that's called a ratio. And then an equation of ratios, where you have 2 of them, is called a proportion. Here's something for Vacation Bible School. The basic Rice Krispie treat calls for 3 tablespoons of butter for every 6 cups of rice, and it makes 16 servings. You've been assigned to bring treats for a large VBS consisting of 320 children. That's probably even smaller than what your church does. How many pounds of butter will you need to make treats for 320 servings? So first, you just organize our information, our basic. For 16 servings, my proportion is 3 tablespoons of butter for every 6 cups Rice Krispie. That's for 16 servings. Now, we don't buy butter by tablespoons. We buy butter by the pound. So at some point, you're going to have to deal with converting tablespoons into pounds for very large. So the first thing we're going to do is simply figure out how many of the recipes we need if we're doing this. So if 16 servings makes 1 recipe, I'm going to do that conversion first. So 16 servings for 1 recipe. Now I know you can do this in your head, but I'm just showing you how we do it in formal math. And I need 320 servings. And I need to know how many recipes am I making. So that's a proportion. Once again, when you have a proportion, you cross multiply. So I have 16 times an unknown equals 1 times 320. To solve for the unknown, we're going to divide by 16. And you do 16 into 320. I know 16 is going to go into 32 twice, and I have a 0. So I basically need 20 recipes. So now, the original recipe calls for 3 tablespoons butter. And that is for a single recipe. I'm asking myself, if I make that recipe 20 times more, I don't think I'm spelling recipe correct. You're finding what I do well and what I don't do well. I never spell that correctly. Anyways, I want to make the recipe 20 times more. How many tablespoons do I need? So I cross multiply again, and it's 3 times 20 equals 1 times an unknown. So I see 3 times 2, I need 60 tablespoons of butter. That does me no good when I go shopping, because you don't buy tablespoons. A conversion, is that a tablespoon is half an ounce. So now we're going to convert right here. Let's get a little space. I'm going to convert what I need into ounces because it's easier to think in ounces. So I know that 1 tablespoon is 0.5 ounces. And I'm asking myself, if I'm using 6 tablespoons, how many ounces am I working with here? Cross multiply. And of course, that's 0.5 times 60 equals our ounces that we're going to get times 1, but we're just going to ignore the 1. So 0.5 of 60 is, so we need 30 ounces. A package of butter is 1 pound is 16 ounces in a package of butter. So now I'm going to do one last proportion, even though you can do this in your head. I'm just going to be consistent with how I do this. So if 1 pound is 16 ounces, and I have 30 ounces, I'm asking how many pounds of butter do I need? That's our unknown. Cross multiply. And that's 1 times 30 equals 16 times unknown. I want to get that unknown by itself, so I'm dividing by 16. So it's basically 30 divided by 16. 16 goes in there once. Wow, I'm doing this longhand. This is not going to be any fun here. What is that? That's 4. That's 140. So now I have to figure out 16 goes in 145, 6, 7, 7, 8. I'm going to cheat. Bring out the calculator. I'm being a bad girl. So our original question was 30 ounces divided by 16. 30 ounces divided by 16. And it's basically going to be 1.8. So a little under 2 pounds of butter. 1.8 pounds of butter. There. And you know how many pounds of butter you need to feed an entire VBS for Rice Krispies. Okay, here's a pharmacy tech example. A doctor order calls for a dosage of 120 milliliters of liquid prednisone at a concentration of 2 milligrams per 1 milliliter. You have 5 milligram tabs in stock and cherry syrup. So we're making this, let's say, for a kid. How much liquid and how many tabs do you need to make the prescription? Okay, so first off, here's the key factor, is that concentration. A concentration in your setting most often is going to be the amount of stuff inside a liquid. So a certain amount of liquid, the amount of stuff in a liquid, that's called a concentration. So we're specifically dealing with a concentration of 2 milligrams of medication for every 1 milliliter of liquid. In this case, it's going to be cherry syrup. Okay, so our ultimate goal is if we have 5 milligram tabs and I need to crush this and add it to liquid to figure out I want that concentration, this takes 2 conversions. So notice I'm just going to start with my proportion, because as you can see, that's what I'm going to do every single time. It's very important you keep your units straight. So we're going to go milligrams over milliliters. So I'm going to actually label that milligrams over milliliters, milligrams over milliliters. So our first order is we start with the proportion we were given. We want 2 milligrams of the prednisone for every 1 milliliter of liquid. First, we need to figure out how, if we want this particular prescription, 120 milliliters of liquid, how many milligrams of medication do we need? So we're going to do that one first. Cross multiply. And that is 2 times 120 equals 1 times unknown. So this, of course, becomes 240, 2 times 120 milligrams equals 1 times unknown. Technically, you would divide both sides by 1, but it's still the same thing. So first off, we have discovered we need 240 milligrams of medication, but the dosage, it's not in liquid form. So for that amount of liquid, we need to figure out how many tabs do we need. So we're going to do another proportion. For every 1 tab, you're going to get 5 milligrams of medication. I need 240 milligrams. I need to know how many tabs. Very important, you have to keep the same kind of stuff. If I have milligrams in the bottom, milligrams have to be in the bottom here. Tabs on top, tabs on top. Align those, don't let them switch. So once again, we're going to cross multiply. So that's 5 times unknown equals 1 times 240. If you want this to look like algebra, that's 5x equals 240. To solve for our unknown here, to divide this out, we have to, the opposite of multiplying is dividing, so we divide both sides by 5. So we're going to go 240 divided by 5. 5 goes into 24 4 times. 20, bring down the 4, 0. 5 goes into 40 8 times. 40, remainder 0. So for this concentration. If I want 120 milliliters at this particular concentration, I'm going to need to crush 48 tabs of medication.